Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am mapping out a floral composition. Gonna show you guys how I paint it. So obviously I time-lapsed this video and I really am just drawing out these flowers I found on Pinterest. When I get in a creative stump or I want to do some floral practicing and it's the middle of winter and there's no flowers outside, what I do is I go on Pinterest, I find something that looks really cute, and I practice it that way. I try to look at all the details of the flowers. So we're gonna grab some colors that I found that will look like it. I have my burnt sienna here, I have the crimson, I also have rose. I am using my Winsor and Newton watercolor palette, and it's just gonna be really fun. We're mixing a bunch of reds, a bunch of pinks, and we're gonna get started. We're gonna start off the flowers. I like to map it out in pencil first because I find it to be really, really fun. So you can do that if you're following along, if you want to paint some flowers with me. And let's get started. Usually I try to mix them up on my palette, but sometimes I will leave a little bit of the paint without the water, and I kind of just blend it in as I go. Gonna add a little bit more rose here on the side because my other rose kind of got muddled into the red over there on the right. So just rinsing my brush out really well after I mix up the colors, and I'm gonna start with the rose flower that is over here on the right. I really just follow the outline I made in pencil. Sometimes I will do more of a watercolor stroke that you'll see in more upcoming videos of just painting a flower without pencil. But for today we have pencil first. So really I just follow my lines. I go in with my paintbrush and I just get in some paint and I do a really light coat first. So you want to get that light coat first because first of all, as you do it lightly and try to use just a tad bit of water to make it lighter, but not too much water where your paint is gonna sit on there and take forever to dry. What you're doing is you're going to build up your gradient of your flower, and you're gonna add a lot more depth and dimension to it than if you just use as much water as possible and use a really wet technique and then it's just sitting there, it takes forever to dry, and then that's basically what's left. After it dries, all you really have is that one layer. So we're gonna do a few layers. This is the first layer, and it's gonna look really weird before it looks good. That's what I have realized while doing watercolor, is that it starts out looking really messy, but as we slowly build it, you have your base layer, you're gonna add more detail later. So we're using my number 3 round brush for this. And now I'm gonna go into that bottom flower and do some orange. You can find a picture like this, like I have right here on my phone, off of Pinterest, or you can find something totally different. If you are a beginner, it's a lot easier if you start off with this first photo that I have, just so you can follow along and kind of get an idea. But we're just gonna go around and do all the petals first, and then we'll go and do the centers. So keep going around and filling in the color, and just try to make it as light as possible. If you feel like you have too much water on your brush, go ahead and just dab your paintbrush out on the paper towel. I'm gonna put these darker colors that are more opaque behind the pink flower and use a lot less water with it because I really want them to be really dark, which is also going to help the flowers on top get really light, and it's going to really make them pop too. Now you can see how it bled a little bit, so I'm gonna grab a paper towel, and all you have to do is just gently blot it up. Keep pressing it lightly and it'll soak up the color. It's a very easy way to erase watercolor, and sometimes if you have watercolor where you don't want it and it's dried, if you just re-wet it with a clean brush and some clean water, you can pull that color out of it too. You just wet the surface and then blot it again. So now that I blotted there, I'm kind of going to avoid that area, and I'm gonna just put a little bit more color there and try to avoid the red. And some of the parts have dried, so I'm going to add a little bit of lines, but we'll go back for more detail with more of a dry brushing kind of technique a little bit later once our flowers have dried. But for now, just kind of loosely get some lines in and just keep going over on all the places where you want the petals to show up. So just go wherever you drew the petals of the flower, just keep going around there and adding the colors for that. I like to bounce a little bit back and forth. If you look closely on your photo of your flower, what you're gonna see is that there are these little tiny yellow spots in the center by the stamen, and there's also almost a star-like object in the center, and it's really green. So we're gonna try to capture that, but first we're gonna go and put a little bit of yellow in. We're not really gonna focus on any of the details, so you can just easily add a little yellow, just kinda plop it all in there with your brush, and we're gonna come back to that once it dries, but really just maybe form a little outline. Don't worry too much about the detail, because once the yellow dries, we're gonna build on it with the green, so you don't want to add it yet, or else it's just going to get really muddy and the center is not going to look defined. So we're trying to make a more defined center in this video, and if you just go along each flower and try to get the yellow in there. Sometimes I like when the yellow bleeds, like you can see in my pink flower there in the center. If you don't want that to, wait just for your pink flower to dry a little bit more and then add that in. But just keep going around and put the yellow in the centers. While we wait for the yellow to dry, I'm gonna go start another flower. There's a red one here at the bottom. So I'm just gonna start filling in the petals, and you can do the same. Sometimes I will do a whole full color, or if I see some spaces, I'll just start in with my line work and just slowly add a bunch of lines. And then you can also, when that dries, go back in and put another color over it. It really just depends what your preference is and what you want to do first. So you can kind of see how this petal on the top, it's going to fall over the flower, so you want to try to make that a little bit darker. And so you can see that in the front of the flower, and you can see how it lays over it. Kind of give it a little bit more dimension, so it doesn't just look like it's all open. So that petal is gonna look bigger and probably darker than the rest of them. So clean out your brush then. After that, I'm gonna go in with a little bit more rose, and now that my pink flower, well, my rose flower, is a little bit more dry, I'm gonna try it out with some paint, move some things around so you guys can see it a little better, and I'm just gonna try to cover up that yellow. That's another option. You can, when something bleeds, if it's a little bit lighter than the color you're going for, you can also wait for it to dry and go over it like I am right now. So that is what I am doing, and then that is also going to build another layer, and it's gonna help add some more dimension to your flower. Now that I did that, I'm going in with a little light green, just very faintly drawing that little circle in the middle, drawing the lines, the part of the stamen, and I'm trying not to touch any of the reds. So I will go back later once it dries to add more detail, but for now, I'm just really mapping it out. So a lot of the process, my process of watercolor, is a lot of times I'm just mapping it out until I go to the next spot, and I kind of just bop around to a few different places. You kind of go back and forth waiting for things to dry and then editing other spots. So waiting for that to dry, and now I'm starting a few other flowers up top. They're really similar in color, so I'm gonna go over it. And guys, feel free to use a totally different color. If you're following along with the same photo and you're like, hey, I don't want any pink here, go put some green, go put some blue. It's totally up to you. This is a fun illustration. Maybe you're unwinding after a long day, or you're just getting some practice in. So this is totally up to you. There are no set in stone rules. For this, just do what you feel like you want to paint and what colors really excite you and things that you love. So I'm just gonna add a little darkness over here. This is the white flower. It's a little tricky. If you're doing a totally different color, ignore what I'm going to say. But if not, if you're going for white, the way you make the white flower is you need to also have gray. So I'm using a little bit of Payne's gray and a little bit of Mars black, and I'm really lightening it and trying to go to the lightest spot first. Now this is looking pretty dark here, but it's actually, as it dries, it's gonna be a little bit fainter. And I'm just going in with the shadows. And as that dries, we're gonna build and we can create some more lines that'll really help the rest of the flower, the white part, pop and show the whiteness. And we're also going to add pen at the end of this. So just because I really love to finish watercolor florals with pen, same thing with my fashion illustrations, love adding some micron pen at the end. That's my style. So if you wanna try that, go ahead, but if it's not, don't worry about it. But I have another white flower down below, so I'm kind of gonna go with the same kind of thing. Gonna do a little bit of black, very lightly, water it down as much as I can. If it feels too dark, just keep adding some more water. And then keep going around there until you have your petals. Now I'm testing out my paper. I'm touching it a little bit and seeing if my petals here are dry, and I'm going to use my little brush right here. This is the 3-0 brush. I really don't know the exact way to say that name, but I'm gonna use that to go in with some really tiny lines. And see over here, I have a little bit of the paint that I did not add any water to. I save that for times like this, and you're gonna see these really dark lines I'm gonna go into the flower with and really lightly go on the edges of the petals and start putting those lines that you're gonna see in the petal, and it's really gonna make it pop. You can already see it popping. Look at up top there. See how dark that line is and how that petal is already starting to form. And I love that. I love how just that little bit of paint, that really thin line after you have a base layer underneath, can make all the difference. And it's really just being patient, right? You're being patient, waiting for that first layer to dry, and then you're gonna go in with your other line, and it just makes it pop. It makes all the difference versus if you let the watercolor just pool and try to put your lines in really quick and it gets all muddy. This is going to make all the difference. And you could also do this with a pen or a marker. Sometimes I go for that. I'll use a pink or red marker over it. Really depends what you feel like using, what kind of materials. But for this, I'm doing all watercolor until we do the pen at the end. So you can just keep going around your petal, looking at your photo for reference, seeing kind of where the lines are. And sometimes, you know, I just go from thought. Really, I just look at my flower and think, where does this line need to go? You want all the lines to really be pointing towards the middle of your flower. Just like your petals. Your petals are pointing towards it. You don't want your lines to be off on the side or something, because it's just not going to make sense and it's not going to look right. So when you're trying to make your flower as real as possible, you really want to make sure all your lines are angling towards the center of the flower, and it's really going to help it look a lot more realistic. So keep doing that with your flower, with this one, and then we're gonna move on to the other flowers. Okay, now that we are finishing up our petals, we're going to go for this last part before we add our ink. We're going to go for the centers, With that green, get a little bit of a darker green. I will often mix my green with Payne's Gray, and that gives it a really nice darkness. And you go in there with your tiny brush, and you're gonna just add some little lines to help define it a little more, define it however much you want it to be defined. And you can kind of just keep looking at your reference photo for where the lines are with the star. Add a little bit more, and then you're gonna be all set. And then we're gonna just add ink all around the outside. You can put it wherever you want. I don't put it completely on the outside, but I just kind of try to define a few petals where I feel like I want a little bit more darkness to help the flowers pop. And that is really all we're gonna do for today. We're now gonna add a little finishing touches, some little spots here. I'm filling in some red right before we add our ink. We're now going to add some ink with your favorite pen. I love microns, and that's it for today, guys. Let me know what else you would like to see, and please like and subscribe, and I hope you guys have a great day.